Thank you for joining us today on the Mike Lindell Show. I'm Vanessa Broussard. Mike Lindell has met so many people across the country during the 2020 election until now. And it's people who have helped him and want to see these elections become safe and trustworthy for all Americans, no matter which party you belong to, Republican or Democrat. People just want secure elections. And so over the week and the next couple of days, we are going to showcase some of Mike Lindell's friends and colleagues who have helped him discover new evidence that they found with voting machines and irregularities. And so we talked to Dr. Frank yesterday. Mike was on the show yesterday. And today we're bringing in former Michigan Senator Patrick Kolbeck. He's joining us today. Patrick, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Vanessa.
So let's talk about the beginning. Walk us through, and that's what Mike Lindell wants to showcase, is that this has been going on for years. And this has really been going on since the 2020 election, when we still believe that there were a lot of issues in that election. And there's a date that we begin with you, and it's October 2nd of 2020 with the Michigan Supreme Court. There was a 7-0 ruling against Governor Whitmer, and that was a state of emergency regarding COVID. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that gave me the indication that there was some serious censorship activities occurring on topics that a lot of people didn't want to discuss, like COVID. At the time, the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, had overstayed her welcome regarding a state of emergency declaration. She had violated the time that she could actually hold the people of Michigan under that state of emergency, and Supreme Court made a decision that was 7-0, a bipartisan decision on October 2nd. But on October 3rd, we couldn't talk about it anywhere. I tried to get out when I was listening to all the media broadcasts about what happened. They said it was a partisan decision. It was not a partisan decision. It was 7-0. So I wanted to get the word out to all the people of Michigan about what really happened. And as it turns out, I couldn't get even a billboard supplier to put up a simple message that says the state of emergency is over for a unanimous 7-0 decision of the Michigan Supreme Court. I knew we were in trouble at that point. And then later on, I saw that these COVID policies were working their way into how we could oversee our elections. And I saw the connection between the two. And the rest, as you say, is history, because that same censorship, that same infringement of our free speech rights was witnessed all across America, and hit people like Mike Lindell in particular that were trying to get the word out about what's happening with our elections.
And then just 28 days later, after that, on October 30th, you published an op-ed in the Detroit News on COVID. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I started listening to what some of our Republican poll workers, were being subject to in their training. And one of the people that recorded one of these training sessions, his recording indicates that the trainer for these poll workers was actually incentivizing the poll workers to make sure that they had their display terminals within 5 feet of a wall. Why 5 feet, you said? Because there was a rule that said poll challengers could not approach the poll workers within 6 feet. So if they had it backed up to the wall, we couldn't observe what was happening. And I was a certified poll challenger going into the 2020 election. I took issue with that, and that was a big deal. So I knew there was some monkey business afoot. If that was actually part of the formal training that went into that was the guidance that was given to the poll workers or election workers. And in this case, the community that training guidance was given was the city of Detroit.
Wow. And so what happened next? You had mentioned that there were some rules that people had to go by, including mailing absentee ballot applications. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there's a whole backdrop of our Michigan Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson. First of all, as soon as she got into office back in 2019, she seeded our qualified voter file, a list of all the registered voters in the state, with over 800,000 ineligible voters. And this isn't just me saying this. This is our former Michigan Secretary of State and current state senator, Ruth Johnson. And Ruth Johnson at the time was calling for an audit of the qualified voter file with her colleagues. That never happened. And so we saw that there are some serious problems happening going into this upcoming election with our Secretary of State. And one of the things that she did with all these ineligible voters, that she sent out absentee ballot applications to everyone in our Michigan qualified voter file. And she didn't have authorization to do that. That's usually done by the local clerks, if anybody. And she used actual COVID funds to pay for that mailing out to all of our registered voters in the state of Michigan. So that was a big deal. And that's another indicator that something was rotten in Denmark going into the 2020 election.
Changing signature verification requirements for online absentee?
Yeah, that was an example of lawfare. And what do I mean by that? And we're seeing lawfare with Mike in the crosshairs, President Trump in the crosshairs, Sidney Powell, John Eastman, a lot of folks, Rudy Giuliani. But this example of lawfare was where a organization called Priorities USA actually filed a lawsuit against their friend, Jocelyn Benson. It's called a friendly lawsuit. And what they said is that there's problems with your signature verification approaches. We think they're biased. And so Jocelyn Benson says, you know what? I think you're right. And she reissued or redefined the guidance around signature verification on absentee ballots to the point where you had to assume that they were valid, and there was really no pathway to go off and reject an invalid signature. And the reason she did this, and the reason they did it via the court system, we're all seeing why they did it through the court system with some of these judges that are out there right now that are part of the racket, if you will, part of the election fraud scheme. And they sought to go around the legislature, which was controlled by Republicans at the time, back in 2020. And they wanted to go around the legislature. And so instead of asking for a change in the law to provide clarification around the signatures, she did it unilaterally outside of the constraints of law. And she was found in violation of law as a result.
Wow. So during this time, you're a senator, correct?
No, I was just Joe Citizen. I was actually, at the time, I was heading up operations at the Michigan Armed Forces Hospitality Center. It's a organization I founded for taking care of our veterans and their families and active duty members and their families while they're on travel. So it was.
So what's going through your mind? So you see all these irregularities and these things that are going on that shouldn't be going on. What's taking place behind the scenes at this time?
Well, I actually wrote a book on this called 2020 Coup, and I broke it out into 4 basic phases: preparation phase, main attack, backup attack, and defense phase. And this phase, what we're doing is the preparation phase. So what we're seeing is the implementation of these COVID rules. We're seeing the revision of the requirements around signatures. We're seeing the use of COVID funds to send out absentee ballot applications. There's a lot of craziness going on. That's just not the way elections are supposed to be run in the state of Michigan. And so they were very active in this preparation stage, and they were very focused on one of the main weaknesses in our election systems all across America, and that is mail-in voting, because mail-in voting is fundamentally a third-party transaction. If you control the database, you control the process, because it's all third-party. It's not one person going in and casting their ballot and putting it in the tabulator. You depend on third parties throughout the whole process.
Okay, so I want to go back to some of the other things that you saw, Patrick, during this time, during the 2020 election. And one of my favorite rules, and I'm sure a lot of people watching can agree, the 6-foot rule: stay 6 feet away from everything during COVID, prohibiting poll challengers from being within 6 feet of poll workers. What were you seeing there?
Yeah, well, that was, as we were talking about the training sessions, we're actively encouraging poll workers to make sure that their monitors were within 5 feet of a wall so that the poll challengers could not see what was going on. That's not exactly transparency, if you know what I mean. And so we conducted a series of poll challenger trainings going into the election, letting people know some of the chicanery that we were witnessing in the training. And that all prepped me, frankly, for what happened on November 3rd, 2020, where I was a certified poll challenger out at the TCF Center in Detroit, which is where they counted all the absentee ballots all across the city of Detroit. And a lot of bad stuff happened during the 24 plus hours that I was there.
Let's talk about the 72% of precincts who were not balanced and not subject to a recount. What can you say about that?
Well, that was the figure. I mean, so essentially, whenever you conduct an election, you want to make sure that the number of voters equals the number of ballots that were tabulated. If they're not, the precinct is called unbalanced. And in Detroit, they had a habit of being unbalanced to the point where in the August primary in 2020, 72% of the precincts in Detroit were unbalanced. That's a no-no. I come from a community in Canton Township, Michigan, where our former clerk, Ms. Bennett our clerk Bennett was, she would freak out if just one of her, something like 80 precincts was unbalanced. City of Detroit, 72% of them were unbalanced. And a funny story later, when we were going through certification of Detroit's results after the general election, one of the Democrat canvassers said, it's no big deal. That's the way it always is in the city of Detroit. The amazing thing is after the election, they actually, Detroit improved in the general election over their primary election performance. They were 72% unbalanced during the primary, but they were only 71% unbalanced after the general election.
Wow. Well, so then that happens where you're talking about this recount. And then you also have, Patrick, some partnerships going on that you're discovering. Rock the Vote. The Secretary of State enters into this partnership with Rock the Vote, allowing groups to add Democratic voters directly into the state's voter registration. What's going on here?
Well, in fairness, a lot of that discovery came after the election once I started digging into what really happened. But what we came to find out is that this partisan organization, they build themselves as nonpartisan, Rock the Vote. Their focus ostensibly is on get out the vote. They had what's called an API, an application program interface, into the state qualified voter file containing all registered voters. And the official narrative on it was that they were only using it to register voters and push them into our state qualified voter file. Um, but what I've been able to investigate since that point in time is that this API, particularly prior to May 2022, also allowed them to read what was going on in the qualified voter file. And just so you guys know, in Michigan, that qualified voter file contains voter history data, so they know who voted, who didn't vote. They also, by way of proxy, we have a requirement in the state of Michigan that says that all of these state electronic voting systems, which are Dominion, ES&S, and Hart InterCivic, they were all required by contract to have an interface with the state qualified voter file. So if Rock the Vote had an access to the qualified voter file, and the qualified voter file was accessed by the electronic voting systems, it's not a huge logic leap to assume that the folks at Rock the Vote could potentially also have access to data that electronic voting system manufacturers were managing for the state.
Well, if you talk to them, Patrick, they'll say there's absolutely no way that that could possibly happen.
Yeah, it depends on how you talk to them, though. If you talk to them in the media nowadays, that's exactly the narrative. However, what we found, thanks to the efforts of Sheriff Dar Leaf and Attorney Stephanie Lambert, who is the attorney for Patrick Byrne, is that what Dominion says in public is very different than what they say in private. So if you have one of their email addresses and you started talking to them, you would find a much different story. And thankfully, we've got a lot of that information that's coming out due to a good friend, Sheriff Dar Leaf in particular. And by the way, if you want to find out what I'm talking about there, I highly recommend following him on X. It's just Sheriff Leaf is his handle. And if you go up there, you'll see all of his postings. He doesn't do anything except post on letters that he sent out to our friends in DC, and also some of these internal emails from Dominion that indicate a lot of criminal activity. And so, so their public persona at these electronic voting systems is much different than their private persona, I can assure you.
Right, and we'll get to more of that here in just a little bit, but I'm going to continue on to this timeline where we talked about Rock the Vote, and we all know this too well. If you are on Facebook and you say anything about President Trump or a stolen election or anything that makes you or would make Facebook think that you're a Republican, you go to Facebook jail. So let's talk about founder of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg's donation of $250 million to the Center for Tech and Civic Life.
Yeah, actually, I just found out something today that's even more damning than that. This is what everybody's been talking about. The Center for Tech and Civic Life was essentially a funding mechanism to provide demographically biased support for Democratic voting areas and get them drop boxes, for example. So it kind of tilted the battlefield to make sure that the Democrats had easy access to, and some would say covert access to, dropping these absentee ballots off into. And Republican areas, just like in other states like Pennsylvania, I think it was most egregious out there, where they, and also, in states like Wisconsin, where it wasn't technically even allowed under the law, but they still did it anyway. This was kind of a big deal. And there was obviously a national campaign through the likes of folks like Mark Zuckerberg that were pushing this funding of essentially Democrat Get Out the Vote initiative under the auspices of a nonpartisan organization.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so we see all this, and then this is stuff that is all starting to come out.
Yeah, one quick follow-up on that, because this ties into this censorship of free speech. In parallel with this, Zuckerberg was actually part of all big tech, and frankly all big media, and all big government, and all the big leftist NGOs were all part of an organization called the Election Integrity Partnership. And so we talked about the bias just a second ago on the deployment of these drop boxes and stuff, but there was also significant bias when it came to free speech. And this was discovered after the election, but this was going on before the election. So I think it's important for people to understand how the narrative was being shaped, not just after the election, but in the lead up to the election, by this organization called the Election Integrity Partnership. And that partnership featured those governance stakeholders like CISA, like the E.I. Isaac Center, Information Sharing Analysis Center, and the Global Engagement Council, which is a State Department organization. They were teaming up with big tech and big media to censor Americans who had concerns around the conduct of our elections. And this came out in a congressional report by the Weaponization of Government Committee after the election. And they showed the receipts. They showed all the emails of these guys setting up where the federal government, which has this First Amendment constraint that says Congress shall make no laws respecting the infringing upon the free speech of Americans. I mean, it was pretty clear that that's exactly what they were doing with these quote unquote members of civil society with the big tech and big media. They were creating a hit list that says these guys, these narratives are being out there. They're classifying as misinformation, disinformation, and we got to do something to put out these 4 a.m. talking points to make sure these guys don't get their message out. So if you wonder where all these fact checkers came around, where they got their materials from, it was from this group. And we know now that it was just George Orwell's Ministry of Truth trying to silence anybody like Mike Lindell who wanted to talk about what was going on in our election.
Yeah, I think we need to fact check the fact checkers. So I want to go back to November 3rd and 4th and then do a quick synopsis, a quick timeline, Patrick, real quick. We got the background now, and it's given people an idea of what went on behind the scenes. So November 3rd and 4th of 2020, that is the general election. Then let's fast forward to November 30th. You testified before the Arizona legislature. What was that testimony about?
I talked about the internet connections I observed out in the state of Michigan. I talked about our contracts that we had in the state of Michigan that explicitly called for these internet connections that everybody was denying even existed. And so we were just sharing another state's perspective on what we observed and what I personally observed first as an eyewitness in the city of Detroit regarding what occurred on November 3rd and November 4th. Because just for background, on November 3rd and 4th, I was actually there when the vans came up at 3:30 in the morning dropping off ballots without any sort of chain of custody whatsoever. I was there when they put the pizza boxes up on the windows at the TCF Center to block poll challengers from coming back in, and I was outside training our next batch of poll challengers. And I was there as a certified Microsoft small business specialist monitoring all these terminals and identifying the fact that these machines were indeed connected to the internet. So this is kind of a big deal, and that's all the information that I wanted to share with the folks out in Arizona and frankly with the rest of the world.
Interesting. So you saw all of this firsthand with your own eyes on election night.
Yes, and I can tell you, I was kind of a unique background because when I served in the Michigan Senate, my last term, I served as vice chair of the Elections and Government Reform Committee. And one of the first things that I did as a member of that committee was I actually did a map, a diagram of all the election processes, everything from how do you register a voter to how do you certify an election. So I was pretty well spun up on the processes. I was also a certified Microsoft small business specialist, so I understood the technology as well. And so when I got into the TCF Center, I found out, and I was probably too nice at the time. I was thinking that if I just point out some of the problems there, they'd go off and fix it. That wasn't the case at all. And I didn't know what we were up against at the time.
And just days later, fast forwarding to December, still less than 1 month after the election, you had to testify before the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee. What was that about?
Once again, it was the same thing. It was talking about the fact that we were observing fractional votes. We were identifying, I was sharing all the information around how our electronic voting systems are actually designed to go off and work. And so that was testifying before the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee. So we're just really in this mode after the election, trying to get out the word to everybody who would listen to us, because the narratives that we were hearing in the media were nowhere near what was really happening or what really happened. And matter of fact, remember that van footage at 3:30 in the morning, nobody believed that van came in until Gateway Pundit went out and procured the surveillance video and showed everybody that it did indeed happen.
Wow. Unbelievable. So then you testify. The very next day, here comes Mayor Rudy Giuliani testifying before the Michigan House Oversight Committee. What is he saying now?
Him and Jenna Ellis were all just talking about all the different issues that were identified, and we had given them a care package, a fire hose, if you will, of affidavits from identifying all the irregularities that happened during the election. Things like voters being entered into the poll book real time with birth dates of 1/1/1900. Well, they didn't know what the birth date was. How could you verify that they were even old enough to vote or that they weren't dead or whatever? They were just putting in dummy data in it. So they highlighted some of that concern. They had the testimony of a wonderful lady that she was one of the poll workers, and she was being instructed to do these updates, which she knew were wrong because it was fraudulent. She was entering in fraudulent election records into the poll book just so that they could try to get close to matching the number of ballots with the number of voters. And she actually wrote down on a little Post-it note and dropped that Post-it note saying, "Meet me in the bathroom." And a poll challenger who was paying attention picked that up and ended up meeting her in the bathroom. She was afraid to talk about this in front of the poll inspector on site there, but she highlighted what was really going on in the games that they were playing with the manipulation of the data in the poll book. So that's what Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis shared. We also had, I still remember, Hema Kalanigareddy. She testified to this effect, and because she was Indian, a lot of the Democrats thought that because she was a minority, that she was a Democrat. So they were sharing all kinds of stuff with her about how they were messing with Republicans, and so she shared her testimony. While she was doing that, she got doxxed, or where she lives got doxxed online by Democrats, and she lived by herself, and she had to drive home that night, and there were a lot of threats against her life, and so we had to get her a police escort that night, and thankfully I had pretty good relations with the Michigan State Police at the time because I was a former chair of that committee, and we made sure we got her a good escort and got her back into her home community out in Northville. And she was all safe and secure. But that's the garbage that we were dealing with that night. Yeah. People were afraid for their life to go off and testify to the truth. And that's the real, and there's still another poll inspector that was so afraid that we were praying with her outside the committee room. And she finally came to the conclusion that she couldn't testify because she was afraid for her life.
And I think, Patrick, that's kind of where we are today. People are scared to say anything. And we just saw this in the Mike Lindell case in Colorado. Our right to speak out, to say something. And if you see something, say something. We're told that, right? If you see something, say something. And so when we do, you're threatened or your life's on the line. And so people just back away. Look at Mike Lindell. He called someone a traitor and he's slapped with a $2.3 million lawsuit, or a bill. And so it's just people are scared to talk. And that's what they want. They want you to be scared to talk.
Absolutely. Dominion issued 2 cease and desist letters to me because I was talking about what was actually in their contract with the state of Michigan. I was sharing concerns with that. I was actually repeating information that other people before 2020's election were talking about with D's next to their name. We were talking about the vulnerabilities of electronic voting systems. And so they tried to silence you. They tried to intimidate you. And they have their friends in the media at the time that would go off and take their letters I wonder how they got copies of these letters, but they would actually repeat them and put out a one-side narrative that effectively vilified me personally. And there's other instances of, I wasn't the only one that was sent these letters. A lot of people were sent them and they stayed quiet on all this stuff. But like Mike, I'm not going to sit there when I know what's true, when I know what's right. I'm not going to shut up about it. We're going to make sure people know what's happening. And they tried all kinds of thug tactics from that point forward. I've had special agents from the Attorney General's office visit my home. You know about Mike and the FBI going in and stealing his phone. And if anybody knows Mike, he lives on that phone. That's a big deal. When I attempted to oversee the tallying of the votes at the county level in a later election in 2022 primary, I was by myself. I was shadowed by 5 members of the law enforcement community, 2 members of the Detroit Police Tactical Unit, 1 deputy sheriff from Wayne County, and 2 special agents from the Attorney General's office, all making sure that I, as a certified poll challenger, was not able to observe the election processes executed during that primary. So, yeah, they try intimidation tactics, and I don't know about you, but I do know about you, Vanessa, but I ever since junior high school, middle school, I'm so over bullies. I'm tired of it. And frankly, it just takes people to stand up and say, no, guys, I know what the truth is. And that's why I'm so proud of Mike in the recent trials that he said, while everybody else settled on their trial, he actually said, nope, we're going to trial and I want a jury and we're going to do this the American way.
Absolutely. And so, you were just talking about Dominion. They testified a month and a half, December 15th, 2020. The Dominion CEO did testify before the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee under oath. Yep. Before we get to you meeting Mike Lindell, let's talk about a quick recap of what happened under that testimony.
Yeah, on December 15th, he testified before the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee. And like you said, he was under oath and he had legal counsel present. And he made, at least by my count, 15 perjurous statements. And I remember at the time I was texting members of the committee saying he's lying, he's lying. And here are the questions you need to ask him. And we know we've got all the evidence in support of all those assertions now. And I've attempted to file criminal complaints to that effect here in the state of Michigan. But our justice system no longer has a blindfold on here in the state of Michigan. But thankfully, after the 2024 election, we now have a federal route to pursue. And I can tell you those same complaints around perjury, where I was joined by 3 Michigan state representatives in my assertions, is now filed with our friends out at the Department of Justice, and I hope to see action on that soon. But this is a big deal because that testimony by John Polis under oath for the Michigan Senate formed the basis of the Michigan Senate report that would come out in April the following year. And that report was widely used in every single one of the court cases that I've seen on election fraud as validation that there was no evidence of widespread election fraud. Well, that whole report itself was based on fraud.
Yeah, and so that was in December. And so we have November to December of 2020. We just took us through that. And then we wrap up 2020. And when we come back, Patrick, I want to take a quick break because it was in January of 2021 that Mike Lindell contacted you about picking you up on a plane and taking you to an undisclosed location. We'll talk about that next here on The Mike Lindell Show. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Mike Lindell Show. I'm Vanessa Broussard, joined today with Patrick Colbeck, who has been walking us through from the 2020 election. We made it through November, December, and it wasn't until January of 2021. That's where we left off. That's when Mike Lindell contacted Patrick Colbeck about picking him up in his plane and taking him to an undisclosed location. Patrick, what was that all about? What can you tell us?
Well, first of all, I'm embarrassed to say now, but at the time, I had no idea who Mike Lindell was. And I got this phone call from him and saying, yeah, I want you to fly out and go off and help record a documentary that I'm putting together. And I want you to share your experience around the election. And I go, okay, who are you again? I didn't say that to Mike at the time, but what I did after is I called up a friend of mine that was connected to General McInerney. And I said, asked General McInerney, is this for real? And he goes, yeah, it is. And I got to tell you, Vanessa, at the time, I'm just thinking of, okay, pick me up in a private plane. I've never flown on a private plane, so I'm excited about that opportunity for the first time, I got to admit. But at the other part of me was sitting there remembering the old song "Bye Bye American Pie," where all the music died because they all got all these musical artists up in the plane at the same time and it crashed. And I was thinking, oh man, with all the people behind this election fraud, maybe that's what they're trying to do here is get all the people to know what really happened, and they're putting them in a plane. I know it sounds a little melodramatic at this point in time, but there's a lot of crazy things happening back then, and all I can say is I was excited that Mike gave me the call and brought me in in a flight that ended up eventually being out in Memphis, Tennessee. But at the time, it was a complete mystery to me.
Wow. So you get on a plane, a private plane with Mike Lindell, who you hadn't met yet. That was the first time you had ever talked to him. You go to this mystery location and you shoot the film, and he puts you in that film. What was, I know a lot of people, that's on our website, Absolute Proof. If you go to lindelltv.com, you can see that. There it is right there. So when you get there, do you know more about what your role is here? Has he talked to you on the plane about what you're going to be doing? How did that come about?
Well, we're sitting on the ground floor of this home where the studio is upstairs, and we're in the ground floor, and it's kind of used as a green room, if you will. So we're all eating pizza in between takes, and gradually you get called up, and it's your turn up on the stage to go off and talk about your experience. And it was a long time before I got up there. Eventually, I got up there and talked about what I witnessed regarding the internet connection. So you know how important that is with what Mike revealed in the documentary Absolute Proof. But and if you actually watch the documentary Absolute Proof, if you blink, you'll probably miss me. I'm somewhere in the middle for about a 30-second segment, just highlighting. Listen, I know what I saw. These machines were actually connected to the internet. Since that point in time, we now have evidence in support of my assertion that the machines were connected to the internet, besides my eyewitness statement and other eyewitnesses that I brought in. But it was kind of a big deal.
Hey, because that 30 seconds that we're watching right now, that was the start of this bond, of this partnership between you and Mike Lindell, where you have grown together in this fight for election integrity. So this was the start of it. And then there was an event later on in the year in August, what's called the Pitt event. What was that?
That was actually True the Vote to put it together. Now, I had known Catherine Engelbrecht with True the Vote back when I was in the Michigan Senate. I used to go to these pro-family legislator conferences every year out in the Dallas, Texas area. It was put on by good friends, the Barton family, and it was a combination retreat/policy conference. And one of the years that we went there, Catherine Engelbrecht was testifying about her experience with Lois Lerner, trying to keep her from having a 501c3 status for True the Vote. They did not. They sent every alphabet soup agency after Catherine Engelbrecht, and so when I heard her testimony, we kept in contact. When I was in the legislature, I was going to bring her out and troubleshoot and evaluate the integrity of our election system. So I knew her back then, and we kept in contact. And obviously, we connected quite a bit after the election to share notes, and eventually leading up to this August Pitt event with her and Greg Phillips, where they shared all this information around Koenig and Koenig's connection with the Chinese Communist Party, where they were actually, this Koenig organization was based in Michigan, out in East Lansing, which is the city where Michigan State University is. They had contracts with the city of Detroit, where they would actually share sensitive poll worker data with their friends out in China. And Catherine and Greg had all this information showing how all this information was visible on servers in China.
Wow. So that was all, taking place during this timeline. I want to go back, Patrick. So you and Mike Lindell, your friendship is blooming during this time, right? In your connection with each other and a lot of stuff that you're working on behind the scenes. You actually showed up at his cyber symposium. Is that correct? Were you there?
Yeah, I was just one of the attendees there, and Mike wanted me to work with Mark Cook, Sean Smith, and Draza Smith on setting up a demo of or a simulation of an election and show how easy it is with the actual software and hardware that's used in the conduct of our election, how easy it is to steal an election. And I can tell you, Mark and Sean and Draza pulled a rabbit out of their hat. Within 12 hours, they replicated a high fidelity electronic voting systems with a whole script around how they would actually demonstrate right in front of observers how they would steal the election right in front of them, and it would go without detection by those observers. And they did a great job.
So that's the Cyber Symposium. I was there as well. I know a lot of information came out of the Cyber Symposium and knowledgeable information as well, Patrick, that people could take home with them and proof, in my eyes, of how easy it could be to manipulate these machines and these elections. Years have since passed. We've seen that Mike Lindell has just exited this trial in Colorado. Where do we stand now? You have the President of the United States who has come out and said that, we need stronger laws on election integrity. He signed an executive order just coming out the other day wanting to name a special prosecutor to investigate the 2020 election. Are you seeing some movement? Like, is there, for the people at home who may not be as in the know behind what's going on behind the scenes, they believe that the 2020 election may have been manipulated or stolen. Is there any hope for these people who are wondering, is it ever going to end for the fighters like you, for Mike Lindell? When does it end?
Absolutely. I think there's reason for hope. And as a matter of fact, that was actually the theme of some of the summits that Mike conducted in the intervening years, was reason for hope. And this persistence has started to pay off. So President Trump won the 2024 election in large part because he made it too big to rig. It's not because our election systems were fixed, that the security loopholes were fixed. I hate to say it, but that's not the case. We have to fight every single election until we actually restore this election integrity. But I'll tell you, here's my reason for encouragement. Number one, on day one of the Trump administration, he issued roughly 8 executive orders that directly or indirectly dealt with the topic of election integrity. Now, they weren't titled election integrity, but they dealt with a lot of addressing some of the key concerns under the surface that investigators such as myself and others have witnessed that were at the core of the cabal that was behind stealing the 2020 election. So if you know who Millie Weaver is, she had a lot of undercover whistleblower video before the election that she gave to the FBI that showed the leftist organizations actually planning a real insurrection. They were planning how to take over government buildings. They were planning on how to break windows. They were planning all these activities that we saw manifest in January 6th and elsewhere. And they were all folks with a lot of pronouns after their names in these Zoom chats. And so if you see that one of the day one activities that President Trump went after was all these DEI enthusiasts, if you will, and all these DEI policies throughout the federal government, well, that's who these people were in these videos planning the insurrection. They're all federal contractors and federal employees with in the pronoun crowd. And so there's a connection there. Also, when President Trump designated cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, cartels are messed into all the funding mechanisms and money laundering activities that support the election fraud. So he chopped that off at the knees. And this is just a couple examples of what he did on day one. So yeah, I'm very excited about that. He went on March 25th and issued an executive order around preserving the integrity of our elections. That was very effective, and we're still working through that. And President Trump, when he issued that, said that there's going to be many more following. Also, we had the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, come out and highlight that there are indeed serious problems with the security of our electronic voting systems. And as you alluded to already, the latest and greatest reason for optimism is the clear statement by President Trump calling for a special prosecutor to be appointed to investigate what happened during the 2020 election.
I know you do as well, Patrick, but I long for the day where this is all over for Mike Lindell, where he does, and you, and for everyone who's fighting for election integrity. And so, it's a long battle. It's been almost a 5-year battle now, over 4 years. And so at some point, we only have 3.5 years left with President Trump. So we've got to get this going fast, get it done, because we don't know what's going to happen after President Trump leaves office.
Yeah, and I think he's been doing that as fast as reasonably possible, frankly. You saw what he did on election night. I mean, he was hitting the ground running on that. But there's been a few things where we had to do some real spring cleaning out in D.C., and particularly in the Department of Justice and the FBI, and as we're seeing in the judicial system. There's a lot of folks that we got to kind of flush out, and I'm confident that is indeed being done now. And the fact that President Trump signaled that it's time to appoint a special prosecutor tells me that most of the cleanup operations have been conducted, because after you get the special prosecutor going, you're going to get indictments, and then you're going to be popping back into the court system. And we want to make sure that we have that full of justices with their blindfold on, instead of all the ones that we've had for the last few years with their blindfolds off.
Well, Patrick, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but any top picks?
I would love to see Ed Martin, personally. I think he's got a passion for not just doing the right thing, but he understands what's been done regarding our elections. Also, Attorney Stephanie Lambert would be another good candidate. I think Sidney Powell would be a great candidate. I think there's a lot of folks that would kind of fit the bill there that I'd love to see in it. But number one, what I'm looking for is somebody with a passion to make sure that justice is done. And just like Mike has exhibited this backbone of steel, that anytime somebody went off and tried to silence him, he just got even louder. We need that same type of personality in the special prosecutor as well.
Well, I can promise you that if Mike Lindell's behind them with his bright personality, they will be working hard to get that figured out. But Patrick, it goes back to, we only have about 8 minutes left. It goes back to, President Trump says we have evidence. So what does he see that we haven't seen yet, or the public hasn't seen yet, for him to want to appoint this special prosecutor? But the left and these voting machine companies will say there is no evidence. These people are crazy. They're conspiracy theorists. They have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah, see, here's the strange thing about that. If you're so confident that your elections are run in a very, in a manner of full of integrity, if I'm in that position, I put all my cards face up. I let everybody see exactly how the election was conducted. I have nothing to hide. The exact opposite has happened. And anybody who tries to assert that something's different, they make sure that they're silenced. That tells you everything you really need to know around the truth of them saying that there's nothing to see here. What the fact of the matter is, we've got a lot of evidence on this. We've had a lot of evidence since day one on all this of the election fraud. Not only is it widespread, but it's significant, and it changed the outcome of the 2020 election. So what's different now is that, particularly for folks like me in states like Michigan, where I have no state judicial path open to me, no state law enforcement path open to me, is that now that Trump is back in the Oval Office, we have a federal route for justice that we didn't have before. We have Pam Bondi in as the Attorney General. We have Kash Patel heading up the FBI. We have Dan Bongino working with them. We have folks like Ed Martin that are heading up the Weaponization of Government Committee. So there are some good people in place. Oh, by the way, one other special prosecutor I forgot to mention, Dr. John Eastman would be great in that role as well. So there's a lot of, for me, that's a lot of reason for hope, is that we do now have that federal route, and now all that evidence that we've been collecting and curating and organizing, I can assure you that all that information has been served up on a platter to our friends in D.C.
Right, can't wait to see what the future holds. President Trump has said when he signed the latest executive order on election integrity, he said more to come in the coming weeks. And so I know he's on it, but he has a plate full right now, as we know. Patrick, real quick, again, only a couple of minutes left. What are your final thoughts on the trial regarding Mike Lindell in Colorado?
I know Mike is extremely happy that My Pillow was completely exonerated, and that's a perfect Philippians 4:8 approach to it. Focus on what's noble, true, excellent, and praiseworthy, and that is very important. The fact that they were seeking $60 million in damages and they only got 2.3, and only 440,000 of that is specific to Mike, that is a victory. But the fact that when you actually look at the jury instructions that were issued by Judge Nina Wang, when you actually understand that she actually called Mike out as guilty of defamation to the jury when she's giving the instructions, what you see is that there's significant grounds for appeal. And in those jury instructions, I can tell you they had all the juicy tidbits of evidence that the plaintiffs submitted during the trial. They didn't have any of the defense statements in those jury instructions. So those statements were not on the sheet of paper that the jury got to consider when they were issuing their ruling. And one other key point: when this suit was initially filed, there's over 150 statements of evidence put into the lawsuit. Only one of those statements had any sort of derogatory statement being made by Mike Lindell. Now, in a civil trial, the burden is that you have to have the preponderance of evidence in support of your case. Clearly, the preponderance of evidence in this case that standard was not met. Only one out of 150 pieces of evidence dealt anywhere with the subject of the actual lawsuit, which ostensibly was defamation. So on that ground as well, I think there's grounds for appeal. And so for me, it's just sad that he even has to go through this anymore. He should have been fully exonerated, in my estimation.
Mine too. That's why I told you just minutes ago, Patrick. I can't wait for the day where this is all over for Mike Lindell. He deserves it. Well, we always appreciate you coming on the show, and you're invited anytime you want to come on and give us updates. Always a pleasure to have you, Patrick.
All right, great to be with you, Vanessa. Knock 'em alive.
And it was good to know your story on how you met Mike Lindell. That was the first I've heard of that one. So I'm glad you came on and explained how that went down and all the way up until to now from the 2020 election. So we have a lot, like you mentioned, to be hopeful for. And so we're going to remain hopeful that President Trump will assign the special prosecutor and get some answers on 2020. Patrick, thank you.
From your lips to God's ears, thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for watching the Mike Lindell Show. Good to have you here with us. I'm Vanessa Broussard. We'll be right back here tomorrow, same time, same place. Have a great evening, America.
You ever see this guy with the pillows on Fox? My pillow guy, Mike Lindell. He is the greatest. The My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell. And he's been with us right from the beginning.